Have you ever felt a room shift the second someone walks in, not because they demand attention, but because something about them feels different? That is exactly how people described the moment Courtney Thorne-Smith appeared unexpectedly at a public event and instantly altered the mood. Conversation slowed, eyes turned, and for a brief second it felt like everyone was processing the same thought at once. This was not about shock or spectacle, but surprise. Courtney had always carried herself with a calm, understated presence, so seeing her arrive with a new sense of confidence caught people off guard. It wasn't loud or dramatic, yet it was impossible to ignore. The silence said everything. Something had shifted, not just in her appearance, but in how people perceived her. It was one of those rare moments when you realize you're witnessing a turning point, the kind that sticks in people's minds long after the room fills with noise again. Why Courtney Thorne-Smith felt so familiar. For many viewers, Courtney Thorne-Smith felt like someone they already knew. Through shows like Melrose Place and According to Jim, she built a career playing characters who were warm, grounded, and relatable. She wasn't written as the loudest voice or the most dramatic presence, and that worked in her favor. Audiences trusted her. She brought sincerity to roles that could have easily felt flat in someone else's hands. Off-screen, she maintained a similar reputation. She avoided unnecessary controversy, stayed mostly private, and let her work speak for itself. Over time, that consistency shaped how people saw her as steady, safe, and quietly talented. That long-standing image is important because it explains why this later moment resonated so strongly. When someone who has spent decades being predictable in the best way suddenly surprises you, it naturally grabs attention and invites conversation. The unexpected shift that sparked attention. What made this moment stand out was not that Courtney Thorne-Smith appeared confident, but that she did so in a way people hadn't seen from her before. The look she chose was bolder than her usual style, signaling a clear shift from the familiar image audiences had grown comfortable with. It wasn't about pushing limits or chasing trends. It was about stepping into something different and owning it. That sense of intention is what people reacted to most. You could see it in her posture, her ease, and the way she moved without hesitation. It didn't feel forced or performative. Instead, it felt like a natural evolution, the kind that happens when someone finally stops worrying about expectations. For longtime fans, the surprise wasn't confusion, it was curiosity. They weren't asking, why would she do this? They were asking, what changed? And that question kept the moment alive. How the public and media responded. Once images and clips began circulating, the response was immediate. Social media lit up with commentary from fans, critics, and casual observers alike. Some people expressed admiration, calling the moment empowering and refreshing. Others admitted they were simply surprised, unsure how to reconcile this new presentation with the version of Courtney they had carried for years. Media outlets picked up the story quickly, framing it as a conversation about reinvention rather than controversy. Importantly, the discussion stayed focused on perception, not scandal. That distinction mattered. This wasn't outrage culture doing its thing, it was collective curiosity. People weren't angry, they were engaged. Even fellow actors weighed in, many offering supportive comments about confidence, self-expression, and growth. The sheer range of reactions proved one thing clearly. Courtney Thorne-Smith had reminded the public that even familiar figures can still surprise you, and that realization kept people talking far longer than anyone expected. Breaking free from a long-held image. When someone spends decades associated with a specific image, breaking away from it can feel risky. Audiences grow attached to what they recognize, and change can feel unsettling. Courtney Thorne-Smith's moment highlighted that tension perfectly. For years, she represented a kind of comforting consistency. And while that earned her respect, it may have also placed invisible limits on how people expected her to show up. Choosing to step outside that box wasn't a rejection of her past. It was an expansion of it. She wasn't erasing who she had been, she was adding to it. That distinction is easy to miss, but important. Growth doesn't mean abandoning your history. It means allowing yourself to be more than one version. In that sense, her appearance wasn't a statement against expectations, but a quiet declaration that she no longer felt bound by them. Was it about attention or self-expression? Whenever a public figure surprises people, the question of motive inevitably follows. Some wondered if Courtney Thorne-Smith was seeking attention or attempting to re-enter the spotlight. It's an easy assumption to make, especially in an era where visibility often feels strategic. But there's another perspective worth considering. What if the choice had nothing to do with public reaction at all? What if it was simply about feeling comfortable, confident, and present in her own skin? Not every bold moment is a calculated move. Sometimes it's just a personal decision finally made without fear. The difference shows in how it's carried. This didn't feel like a performance aimed outward. It felt internal, grounded, and calm. That's why the moment resonated. People sensed authenticity, and authenticity always cuts through speculation. Whether intentional or not, the result was the same. A reminder that self-expression doesn't require permission. Why change makes people uncomfortable? The strong reaction to Courtney Thorne-Smith's appearance says as much about society as it does about her. People often claim to celebrate growth, but when it happens in unexpected ways, discomfort creeps in. We grow attached to the versions of people we know, especially public figures who feel tied to certain eras of our lives. When they change, it forces us to adjust our own perceptions, and that can be unsettling. It challenges the idea that anyone should stay frozen in time for our comfort. Courtney's moment disrupted that illusion. She reminded audiences that no one exists solely for public expectations. People evolve, explore, and redefine themselves whether the world is ready or not. That realization can feel threatening, but it can also be inspiring. It asks a quiet question. If she's allowed to change, why aren't we more accepting of change in others and even ourselves? Confidence without noise or provocation. What made this moment particularly powerful was how understated it was. There was no dramatic announcement, no interviews explaining intent, no attempt to control the narrative. Courtney Thorne-Smith simply showed up as she was and let the moment speak for itself. That kind of confidence doesn't rely on volume or provocation. It's calm, steady, and self-assured. In a culture that often equates boldness with excess, this approach stood out. She didn't need to defend her choice or frame it as empowerment. She embodied it quietly. That restraint is part of why the moment felt genuine rather than performative. It allowed people to project their own interpretations, sparking conversation without forcing conclusions. Sometimes the most impactful statements are unspoken. By not over-explaining, Courtney left space for reflection, and that space is where the moment gained its lasting weight. What this moment says about reinvention. Reinvention doesn't always arrive with dramatic life changes or career pivots. Sometimes it shows up in a single choice that signals a shift in mindset. Courtney Thorne-Smith's appearance felt like one of those moments. It wasn't about rejecting her past work or redefining her career overnight. It was about showing that she still has agency over how she presents herself to the world. That kind of reinvention is subtle but meaningful. It reminds us that growth isn't limited by age, history, or public perception. You don't have to announce a new chapter for it to begin. You just have to act differently when the moment comes. For many people watching, that realization landed close to home. It suggested that reinvention doesn't require permission or explanation. It simply requires the courage to step forward as you are, even when it surprises others. Why people are still talking about it. In the end, the reason this moment lingered wasn't because of what Courtney Thorne-Smith wore, but because of what it represented. It challenged assumptions, sparked reflection, and reminded people that even familiar faces hold unseen layers. Whether viewers admired the choice, questioned it, or simply felt surprised, they engaged with it. That engagement is what kept the conversation alive. Moments that force people to reconsider their expectations tend to stay with us. They tap into something personal, our own fears about change, visibility, and judgment. Courtney's quiet confidence turned a simple public appearance into a broader discussion about identity and growth, and that's why it mattered. Long after the initial reactions faded, the underlying message remained clear. Sometimes the most powerful statements aren't loud or dramatic. They're made by someone calmly stepping into a new version of themselves and letting the world catch up.